I'm Angela Broyles. I'm with Blue Water Publication, or Gritty South, an imprint of Blue Water Publications. And we are with Judy today. She has um, a story in our Father anthology. And the story is Highway 11, and it's a really interesting story. I really enjoy it. I have really enjoyed it a lot, and I've really enjoyed working with Judy. And so I'm going to let Judy introduce herself and tell a little bit about herself right now.
Oh, thank you, Angela. My name is Judy Benowitz, and I'm a retired flight attendant from United Airlines. I spent a decade in the sky in the 70s and 80s in Los Angeles and Honolulu. And while I was in Los Angeles, I earned a degree in drama from the University of California, Irvine. And I spent 20 years on stage in the Los Angeles area and in Cartersville, Georgia, where I live today. So when I moved back to Georgia, my sister took her life. And when she did that, I was so stunned and just couldn't understand. And I wanted to tell her story and learn more about her, know more about her. So I went back to school to learn how to write a book.
Well, so this is a very important story, and it has a lot of really important information in it. I think a lot of people could walk away with a lot. There's a lot of things that could help a lot of people in your story. But what do you think the big takeaway is from your story?
Well, I wanted to tell her story, but the story became about me. And it's important to share this history with other people because I wanted to describe and understand the family dynamic. And so I went back to my earliest memories of Valerie, which was also my earliest memories of my father. And we were brought up in an almost primitive existence with no indoor plumbing, but there was electricity.
Your dad worked for the electric company, didn't it?
He did. He did. And the takeaway of the story is that you can have a loving family and you can also have flaws, and as well as happiness, and both shape you throughout your years. They both make a difference in your life.
Yes, the Gritty South brand that we're establishing, that is what we're trying to help people see, because not all families, not all of what we see posted all over social media is not Hallmark. It's not Southern living, but we can find happiness at the end of even a very disappointing situation. It's what we do with the situation. And can we learn from this? Can we make changes in ourselves? Even at mine and your age, can we make changes in ourselves and establish new habits? And I think that is the big thing that we want to see with Gritty South is go ahead, pull out those hard things and share them. And from sharing those, uh, let's help other people. So,
Yeah, and that's what I think about it too.
well, I was going to ask you. I think it's really interesting that as you were growing up, you called your dad by his first name, and as a child, as you were calling your dad by his first name, did you ever think, "Oh, this is weird. Everyone else calls their dad dad or father or papa, but you called your dad Dan?"
Yeah, and usually that refers to a stepdad, and of course he was my real father. And yeah, the history of that, as I learned later, um, there were three of us kids. So my brother was oldest, then me, then my sister. So when my brother and I were coming up, we did call him Dad. But then when my sister came up, Valerie, she, like my mother would say, go ask your father to us, but I think she would say, go ask Dan. And so my sister just started calling him Dan. And everybody thought it was kind of cute because she was little. And so then Wayne and I started doing it too, because we thought it was cute and funny. And then as we got older, it just became the standard in our house, and people accepted it. Of course, there is a part in my book where I say a lot of the church ladies told us we were going to go to hell for calling our father by his first name. My mother said, never mind those busybodies, you'll have to do something much worse than that to go to hell. So she was, she would take the fear out of life easy. So it was just, and it's interesting, these two, my parents, we came along on the heels of World War II. The war ended in 1945. Both my parents were in the war. My mother is a Navy wave, my dad in the Army. So they came home from war in 1945. They got married in 1946. My brother was born in 1947. And then I was born in 1949 and my sister in 1951. So these are young people who just came off the war and start having a family. So they were both pretty salty characters. When you come from the front lines or just being in that climate, you're pretty tough.
So she knew how to handle those busybodies at church that thought
she's like,
they were going to declare you to hell for what you were calling your dad. So
that's right. She's like, forget about it. So
I love that.
Yeah, she
was.
would.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, how did you calling your father Dan, how did that affect your children's relationship to their father or maybe their grandfather?
Well, the grandfathers were called Grandpa Dan and Grandpa Hal. My husband's father was Hal. And, I thought about it after you asked that question. I thought back to how my kids were brought up. They called me Mother and they called Bob Dad. So, and I think it was because Bob referred to me as Mother. And I'm trying to remember how, if I called him, I probably said, go ask your father. And then they came up with Dad. And I think that's what my mother would say, go ask your father. But yeah, the kids called me Mother. And I just thought about that. And even today, Bob will, when he corresponds with the kids on text, he'll say, Mother and I are going to, LA. And I'll say, I'm not your mother. So I would say, your father and I, your dad and I. See, I do it that way. But I think he always called me Mother. And that's maybe what is the trick to getting your kids to say that. So I don't know.
I think there might be something to that, because I always call my husband Dad or Daddy to my children.
To your kids, yeah. See, and
Yeah.
I don't think I did that because maybe the way I was raised, because maybe my mother didn't either. So I don't know. It's probably some deep rooted memory of mine. I don't know.
So you went back to school and you took what you learned from going to school to write your book. What was that process?
Well, I went back to school as a senior citizen, age 65, and the state of Georgia paid for my master's degree in professional writing. So, I took every course in fiction, nonfiction, biography, web design, any kind of writing that is taught at Kennesaw State University. And I learned how to, and I joined critique groups and writing groups. And so what happened was that that the story, I mean, I wrote a lot of stories. The first story I ever published was about my mother. It was in an anthology called Grit, Girls Raised in the South. And that's Deborah Ford's book. And so I thought, okay, but I always wrote, and, you know, from being a young girl with a diary. But then when my sister died, I thought, I've got to tell the story. And I always had work writing. So I took out the complete works of Judy Benowitz and I placed them on the floor all around my desk in chapters, stories I had written about different characters, like my grandmother, because I thought she was funny, the way she talked, the way she looked, just the way she acted. So I would do little character descriptions of people in my family, even the dogs. And so I had that, and I thought, I've got to find a way to put this in a book. So, and I did. And in fact, this story that is in the Father anthology is the first chapter of my memoir. And my sister's suicide is the hook that opens the story. And I was thrilled when Gritty South wanted my story, because I remember I used to submit, and I'm published in fiction and nonfiction, and I would submit work. And when I saw the Gritty South asking for work, I thought, you want gritty? I got gritty. So I put it forward, and I was just thrilled that you guys picked it up. So thank you.
Well, we are thrilled to have it, and I really have enjoyed your story a lot, enjoyed getting to know you, and our mother anthology will come out next spring. I hope you'll have something in it. So
It might be the second chapter. I don't
it
know.
would be fun. It could be about your mother. It could be about your grandmother, you know.
She might be in it too. I tried, because I know when I was putting it together, Catherine was, you know, wanted me to focus it more on my dad. So I had to do a lot of rewriting, which is fine. It's good practice for me. But I just realized with your questions and interviews, and I'm looking at my notes, that, you know, my sister's suicide shaped my creative life. You know, I felt compelled to write about it. My father was a storyteller, but his stories were humorous about his family. I mean, he could tell jokes and just, you know, enact some of the things he did as a child. But my stories get a little darker, but they have humor too. So I try to be, you know, I don't want to be too dark. But I think many people can relate to suicide, and I think the suicide awareness was just a month ago, recently, and I think it helps people. You know, it affects so many families, and it's hard to understand. And maybe my story can give people peace that they're not alone. So that's
Absolutely. And I think if someone is feeling, I know if someone is feeling desperate or alone, they should reach out for help.
yeah,
And I would hope that someone could learn that from your story and from other stories in this father anthology. But also the families. I mean, it forever changes everyone's life.
yes, it affects a lot
And,
of people. That's true.
and so, did your sister have children?
He had 2 kids and 5 grandchildren. Yes, she was a writer, and she was a journalist. She taught in college. She wrote a book. She had an agent, and but she never published it. And I want to publish her story with a prologue. But it's one of the story. It's a Southern Gothic, and I would like to publish her story too at some point in my career.
That's awesome. That's a good goal. Does her children support
Well,
your writing?
if it's not exactly, they don't want to read it. You know, it's painful, and so that's what gives me pause, because to them, it's reliving it. Of course, it is for me too, but also, yeah, it's hard to write in first person and to write about people. People don't like to read about themselves written by someone else. So you have to do it carefully. And, but I've been writing for a while. They've seen my work and they're just, I think, accepting it and getting used to it. But no, it's not easy, not especially not that subject.
I would think not. I would think not. Um, I've shared some through this publication that my grandmother committed suicide when I was about 24, 25 years old. And when she did that, she had just been in my home for Thanksgiving and went home, and she committed suicide this Sunday after Thanksgiving. And then I have a sister that's quite a bit younger than me, and she's 9 years younger than me. She found her. And so it at the holidays every year, Thanksgiving through Christmas, is always very hard. And for years, I didn't understand why it was so hard for me and why I tried so hard to make things perfect. But all I did was I was anxious and things were not perfect because of my anxiety.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I'm laughing, but it's an nervous laughter here
Yeah.
because
You're right. It's hard to talk about. It's a tough subject, and you have to address it carefully and honestly. And you know,
yes.
it's it's not easy. So I'm I'm taking my time with it. Is what I'm doing.
Well, I think your story helps to give some understanding to the backstory, and it should help a lot of people. And I'm going to real quickly get the right angle here, show people the Father anthology. There are 14 writers in the anthology. And because Peter Last is the first one listed, if you're looking for it online, you would search for Peter Last. It'll pop right up. But it has many really good, interesting stories in it. Top quality writers, award winning writers with very fascinating stories to tell about different aspects of relationship, family relationship, how different things have been handled with parent child relationships. And so I appreciate you so much, Judy, because you really told it like it went, the way it was.
Well, thank you for, finding my story appealing for your publication. So it's an honor to be part of the Gritty South because I am part of it.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to end us here.